So since this is the last day, the last afternoon of the workshop, I was talking to several of you about the exercises that we've done and the discussion around, well, how can we use narrative medicine in a practical way? How can we implement it in our educational programs? How can we implement it in our clinics? So I wanted to share with you some of the experience that we've had at the institution at Columbia University, at the medical school, and at the hospital, in the clinics. And I would like to reflect on our experience, but also look at some of the research that we've done. Think about what outcomes we've measured, what we've shown, and then consider a little bit about maybe what the next stages are for our field. Does that sound like a useful way of spending our time? Okay, and I've kind of labeled it curricula, cultures, and consequences. And these are the things that I'd like to go over in the hour with you. First, talk about the clinical sites. We've done some of this work that you've done here, that you spent 2 full days doing it. We have done it in more shortened models in clinical sites. I'll tell you about what's happening in the medical school and the research that we have and in the future also. Okay? And I want to go back to these basic concepts of narrative medicine. This field is within the whole umbrella of medical humanities. There's many things that are possible. We know there's many things possible with a book. There's many things that are possible for us when looking at a painting. You can't really boil that down to 3-4 things. We know that. It's the infinite potential of the human creative endeavor is not something you can reduce to 3 things. However, with narrative medicine, we've tried to think about how this work can be used as an instrument for change. Instrument for change in clinics, instrument for change in the healthcare system and education. And we've identified these basic ideas that reading closely, observing closely, helps us develop our skills of attention. Okay, we've talked about that a little bit. We also feel that writing, and that's the main modality that we use for representation, is writing. But we have artists in this room that represent in different ways, with visual art, with photography. Right? We know that that's another form of representation. And so is dance, and so is song. I was hoping that Vale might have gotten on the stage yesterday to sing a song, but we heard some other musicians instead. But I did listen to your music this morning on Spotify. Really excellent stuff. So that's another form of representation. It's another form of creative endeavor. We think that representation helps us observe our world with greater acuity and helps us make meaning in our worlds. And then we talked about affiliation as well. We think that doing this work in groups helps us know each other in different ways and helps strengthen the bonds between us. Have you all experienced that even over the past couple of days? You've met people here that you feel closer to than when you came? Yeah. I think that's a natural consequence of this activity and creativity. We talked about how we believe, and I think you do too if you're here and you're open to it, that creativity is a potential that each of us have and not only relegated for people that have self-described musicians or artists or writers, but all of us are creative beings. So thinking about if these are the capacities we want to develop, well, what do we want to achieve? See, these are some of the things that we're hoping we might be able to achieve. The reason why this is important is because if we are saying this is a tool for transformation of the clinical space, then we have to think from a scientific model also. What are the mediators? And if there are particular mediators, what are the things that we can measure in our avenues of research and program evaluation? So if these things are happening, maybe we'll have increased skills of attention and listening to the patient. Maybe our communication can be better. If we do this in teams, maybe team relationships can improve. And if we really, enhance and facilitate creativity, you can say someone is creative, bless you, as a boss, and then you can have a very rigid work environment where you have formal policies for everything, and there's no room to really express, your judgment. So you can say, be creative at home. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying, how do we create spaces where people can be expressive and creative and express their individuality, even in the workplace? So if we really honor that and take risks with our, staff, could we have more creative problem solving? These are just a handful of the outcomes that we can all sit here and imagine. We can think about that together. And if these things happen, why does that matter? Why do we care about those things? Ultimately, it's about hoping that we improve patient outcomes, right? So that's really what we are intending to do here in the long run, is develop healthcare systems that are healthy, that are creative, that are flexible, that end up resulting in a better system of taking care of patients. Because that's really why we're all here in the room, to be able to serve the community and to serve one another and our families when they become sick. So in terms of research, it's good to kind of think about this model, and there are other ways that you could conceptualize this. This is only one conceptual model. But it's nice to think about the model, because when we evaluate our programs, we can really think about what we want to measure and describe. I talked yesterday about, when we set out into our narrative medicine work at Columbia, we were very clear that our final goal was not to create a curriculum. Our final goal was to change the culture in specific ways. Change the culture so that there are certain conversations that weren't taking place before, that there's a possibility of expressing emotions that wasn't possible before, where we can relate to one another in a way that wasn't possible before. So these are all the ways that we are hoping to shift the culture in the way that we do things. So I want to share with you some activities that we've done to hopefully shift the culture of things. First, I want to start with interprofessionalism. Is that a term that you guys use in Sweden? Interprofessional education, interprofessional practice. Just to define terms really quickly, when we talk about interprofessional, we mean that between nurses and doctors and pharmacists and social workers and occupational therapists and priests, so all of these people are all engaged in serving the patient and communities. Interprofessional means, how do we work together as a team? Right? So there are several ways that we've thought about using narrative medicine in interprofessional development. The reason we think that our methods that we're learning this weekend are so poised to be effective for interprofessional work is some of the things you've already experienced. So you might have been in a group with someone and had a conversation about a poem, and you might have written something and heard someone talk about or write about their family or something personal, and you might have had no idea what they did for a job. You're like, oh, I didn't know that person was a physician. I didn't know that she was a head of nursing for her hospital. She was just a human being sharing a story. So there's something about stories and doing this kind of work that what we call flattens hierarchy. So in that space of a poem, we all just come into it as a human being, not as a chief of, the ward of oncology or the nurse that's heading up the unit. We just come as people. So we think that could have an interesting leverage in trying to do interprofessional work. I don't know about here, but one of the challenges we have in the States is that our institutions are very hierarchical, right? So there's the physician at the top, and then there's the rank all the way down. And the reason why that doesn't work so well is because there's actually good literature that shows in workplace settings with very rigid hierarchy, people are afraid to speak up when there's things that they see as going wrong. People are afraid to speak up when they see a solution to a problem that they could offer. And so it affects communication, it affects one's own sense of what's possible. We don't tap into the best of our staff if we say, your job is limited to this little box, stay in your box. But if we really allow free expression of all the members of our team, we allow maybe more conversations and more ideas in our workspace. So in terms of interprofessional work, the other thing that happens is, as you guys have witnessed here just over the past couple of days, is that there's a real emphasis on language and communication, on clarity, on curiosity, on trying to understand what someone else is saying. All of those are basically capacities to develop communication, right? So we know that good teams need good solid communication, they need relationships, and we need hierarchies that aren't so rigid. So all those things that we're experiencing together, it makes sense that it could be applied in team settings, right? So that's what we're thinking also, and we've done this in a couple different ways. One is we have implemented narrative medicine seminars at the medical center for students. So we have nursing students, public health students, medical students, OT, PT, chaplaincy, dentistry. All of these students take seminars together that last an entire semester that are narrative medicine based. And they're topics that cut across fields. So things like death and dying, right? So we might be in a class with all these different professions, and we may be reading poetry and short stories and looking at paintings that deal with end of life. And it's a wonderful way to explore these issues, but also to develop relationships amongst people from different professions. Right, so that's one of the things that we've done now. I think we're in our 8th year. And to start that off though, and what I want to do when I share this with you over this next hour is not only tell you what we did, but talk a little bit about the strategies. Okay, so would that be helpful about how we actually got this started? What we realized at Columbia is that even if we have a great idea to develop this course, it can only be successful if you have strong role models. So we said it can't just be the doctor teaching a course on interprofessionalism. It has to be 2 faculty members from 2 different schools. And so if you want to achieve that, how will you get buy-in? Because you have all these schools sitting side by side, but they're very siloed. They don't communicate with each other. And that's been the tradition at Columbia for decades. And so to break down the silos, what we did was we actually started for a whole year with just doing narrative medicine work with the administrators. So we started by getting deans, student affairs deans, education leaderships, and we ended up getting a grant from a foundation called the Macy Foundation. Not all of us are going to be able to successfully apply for grants to protect people's time, so I recognize that limitation, but we were able to get funding to support people's time. So to give them a little bit of extra stipend or actually free up their time, we met every other week. So this was the Dean of Dentistry, the Vice Dean of the School of Public Health, I was there, Rita Sharon was there from the medical school, and so on, and we would sit together and read poetry and do writing together. And so we developed over a course of a year a strategy for how we wanted to change the university, but also we developed a strong relationship amongst ourselves. Rita Sharon was very strategic in doing that. She knew that you can't just do this, bottom up, so to speak. It can't just be the students trying to make change. It has to be the administrators have to buy in. And one of the keys that we found is how do you get administrators to believe that this work can have potential? What we felt is just get them to experience the work. If you get them in the room and experience it, they will recognize through their own lived experience that this can have value for their students. So that's one of the ways that we got this to happen. We used Macy Foundation money for several years. We got this off the ground, and we just did it every year, even though it took a lot of effort to really coordinate students from across the campus in this way. We put the effort in to do it every year, and before you knew it, the program had its own momentum. That's not going to happen in a year. It requires persistent dedication and effort and concerted effort with a small group of people. It doesn't have to be 100 people. It can be a handful of people at your institution that are dedicated and that believe in this kind of work that get together and make this happen. And what happens slowly is that you develop institutional rituals, just something that happens every year, right? And in your institution, you have the forum. It happens on a regular basis where you have rounds with someone who's a writer or an artist that comes and talks to the community. People expect it after time. The key is, though, how do you transition something from we put all the effort into it every single year to then it becoming institutionalized, so that the institution takes ownership, they give the funding, and then it continues. That's really an important task. What we ended up getting very lucky about is that we recognized that interprofessional education is an institutional priority even before the institution realized it. Because we knew that a regulatory body called LCME, which gives accreditation to medical schools, they come every 8 years and they check a box, all these boxes about whether you're meeting standards. We knew that interprofessional education was a new standard. No one else was really providing solutions for it. So we were providing a solution. And so once the university recognized, hey, we better do something about this, our accreditation visit is in 2 years, we said, well, we have a model here already built, and we have 5 years of experience in this model. This is something that we can continue using. And they said, yes, you have a team already established of nursing, dentistry, et cetera, et cetera. The leaders are already present. Why don't you guys become the university-wide steering committee for interprofessional education? And what came with it was funding that was shared from all of the different schools. Right? So we just kind of ended up getting partly lucky with that timing, but it was also kind of building bridges, building a reputation, and building trust. If we just had done it for 1 semester, 1 year, no one would have cared. But the fact that we've been doing it year upon year, and students knew about it, and it met an institutional need. I think that's an important theme in all of this work. How can we recognize the institutional needs? So we have certain values here that we feel are very important to clinical care and to public health. That's kind of this domain here, right? These values might inspire a lot of people, but institutions oftentimes change by particular levers. Levers of what's the financial bottom line, how does it affect the institutional's finances, and potentially how do you avoid pain. Institutions experience pain by getting regulatory fines. So to recognize what the regulatory bodies are for an institution and what their concerns are, and then you find the overlap. Right? And I'll talk about this when we went to the clinics also, and thinking about how we strategically positioned our narrative medicine work to be able to do it in the clinics. Any question about our narrative medicine work with interprofessional students? Yes, question.
You keep going on with the course, even if you didn't know it was working, you should measure something before and...
Good question. If we did this again, we would have done a program evaluation. We did not evaluate this program. The question was, would you keep doing it even if you didn't get funding? And the answer is yes, because it was still worth our effort. We felt that we were providing an important value for the university and for the students, because the students didn't have an opportunity to meet one another. So, these were the seeds that we were planting, and we really believed it. So I think we would have continued doing it. Because we ended up in our work that we got a cohort of faculty across the schools that were experiencing this and were very inspired by it. So they wanted to keep coming back. They enjoyed teaching it. So let me talk a little bit about the evaluation of the clinics, okay? So I'll describe this project in a minute. This project was really born out of the notion that we were doing a lot of narrative medicine work in medical schools, now public health schools, etc., in the school level. But we also know that if we want to change the culture, a medical student who is in classrooms doing narrative medicine work, having good relationships with other students in other schools, when they go to the clinical setting and they see that the relationships are very different, that the hierarchies are very rigid, and they say, well, everything that we learned a couple years ago, that's total bullshit. That's not how the world works, right? We know that's an experience for medical students, and I'm sure other professional students as well. So we felt, unless we transform the clinical settings, we can't really, educate the medical students well. And unless you transform the clinical settings, you're not really transforming the way that we deliver care, right? So that's why we felt this is definitely the next stage of our work. We also knew that it's a lot harder to get the clinic to say, yeah, we'll give you required team time here. You take an hour. Yeah, no problem. No one's going to say that. They said, we have no time. Our staff is way too busy. And so we knew that was a big challenge at our institutions, and I'll tell you how we kind of went about it. So this is, we framed it as this when we went to the clinics. So for a second, let me just describe how we went to the administrators in the clinics to get them to even try this out. Okay, so what Rita, Sharon, and I did is we sat down and said, what do clinic administrators care about? And we talked to some of the clinic administrators. We said, what are your biggest concerns right now with your teams? And they said the teams aren't communicating, they're not working well, the teams aren't, they're not coordinated, things get dropped. And they said our teams are burning out. We have a lot of turnover. And they said if you can fix those things, we would be open, to whatever you have going on. These were not the clinic administrators we talked to. Those are just some colleagues of ours. And we said, okay, it seems like staff turnover, staff burnout, those are big headaches for clinic administrators. Why? Because it costs them effort and money. If you have a nurse coming in who stays for 6 months and leaves, well, you got to spend a lot more money now to hire someone else, to train that person up, and to integrate them into the teams, right? If they're burned out, they're not going to be working at their best. You're not going to be delivering the best care. And I'm not sure in Sweden, but we have some clinic reforms in America called patient-centered medical home. Do you have that here, something similar? Let me just describe it. It basically is, if you have a particular kind of clinic model, you can apply for federal money to support your clinic. And that clinic model is basically nurses and doctors and social workers have to work on a team. They have to meet once a week or one couple times a month to talk about patients that they're worried about. They're going to the emergency room a lot. They're getting admitted a lot. And the reason why this kind of system exists is because those clinics are then responsible for a population of patients. And if that population of patients consumes fewer resources, the clinic gets more money. If they end up going to the hospital less, if they go to the emergency room less, the clinic gets money. That can only be successful in a team-based model. You can't do that with the doctor working in isolation. So we knew that that was of interest. So when we met with the administrators of these clinics, we said, look, we are established in narrative medicine here. This is the kind of work that we do. These are the outcomes that we think that we can achieve. We think that we can affect burnout. We think we can improve team relationships. We think that it might even improve empathy. And we know that these are some of the concerns that you have as clinic administrators. And basically we had a negotiation of saying, yes, these are concerns that we have, but how much time do you want? Because we have no clinic time. So eventually we negotiated for a half an hour a month. It sounds very minimal, but from a clinic standpoint, it was a lot. Required time. Half an hour a month, required time for the entire clinic. So, and again, I think it was important for us to go through that process because we want to also do something that's feasible. We don't want to create an elaborate program that no one else can replicate. So half an hour a month is what we got. Okay, so why did we do this? We know that collaborative practice is important for quality health care, but these things are happening. Hierarchy, poor communication, and burnout. And that was our question. Can the narrative medicine intervention affect those things? These were the aims of our project, to see if it's feasible and to look at particular outcomes that I'll share with you. We implemented this project in 3 clinics in New York City: family medicine, internal medicine, and pediatrics. Okay, so all of these clinics were places where residents trained and medical students trained. And we were there for a full year. And about 80 participants, interprofessional staff, doctors, nurses, social workers, were all involved in those 3 clinics. This is a photograph from one of the team meetings. This is a nurse, this is a pharmacist, that's a medical student, that's a physician, etc. It's the medical director here. So we all sat together, and similar to what you guys did here, you know, and I'll tell you how we did this in a half an hour also. So this is, you know, we used example, you guys seen this painting before, right? So this is one of the paintings that we used. And the way that we would split the half an hour is this. The facilitator was me. Over the course of the year, you have to be really aware of the clock, because a half an hour will go by like that, right? So the first thing that we did in this half an hour is you set the stage. You know, if there's anyone new in the room, you have a very quick spiel of what narrative medicine is. And said, I want to thank you for joining us today. This is a program that we've just instituted. We'll be here with you for a year. Narrative medicine is a program where we draw from literature and art to generate conversations about healthcare. And we hope that this will strengthen your teams and strengthen communication amongst a team. Any questions? So it can be very simple, right? It doesn't have to be an elaborate description, but just so people kind of know what it is. After you do that, then you basically explore a text. And so you might get a painting like this if you have a monitor, or if you don't have a monitor, you can pass out the piece of paper with the photocopies of the painting. And just like we did, except it's going to be much more shortened, 7 minutes or so, 5 to 7 minutes of conversation. It might not seem like a lot of time, but a lot of discovery can be made in just that amount of time. And you basically do that for a few minutes, and then you write to a prompt, right? And one question is, gosh, will people do this? I mean, they're coming every day to a particular place, they're used to doing certain things. Will they all of a sudden do something like write to a prompt? And the answer is yes. We were very surprised, pleasantly surprised that, you know, someone who's been at a clinic for 15 years doing things in a certain way in a particular conference room was open to trying doing something very different. So there were some people who were a little anxious, but they did it. They tried. And the kind of prefacing that I gave you guys is worth doing. Just remind them, this is not a composition class. We don't care about how good your writing is. It's all about just where the pen takes you. We're just interested in what comes up for you. So you want to really reduce any kind of stress about that. And also make sure to tell them that we're writing with the knowledge that you will share. Because what you don't want to do is have someone write something that they don't want to share, and then you say, okay, now share it with a partner. They said, oh God, I don't really want to share this. Either they won't share or they'll feel pressured into sharing, and that's not good. You know, you don't want to coerce anyone. So make sure you preface it in that way. So the writing is very quick, you know, 5 minutes or so, or 4 minutes. And then what I do is pair share, just like we did here. Because of the time limitation, we ask them to form groups, and I purposefully ask them to partner with someone who is not in your profession. So I said, even if you have to stand up and walk across the table, do it. Partner with someone who is not in your profession. And people did it. So a medical assistant was sitting with the medical director who's never had that kind of conversation with the medical director, and now sharing what they've written with each other. And then what we do, we try to save about 5 minutes at the end to hear from a couple people, right? And it's amazing that short amount of time, remarkable conversations can occur. And what we found was over time, the same groups would meet over time. The amount of trust and opening that would occur over time was amazing. It was really beautiful to see. And usually what happens is people open up during the writing section. What we found, what I mean by open up is just people just speaking frankly, honestly, not taking risks with each other. Usually it happens during the writing. What we noticed after a couple months of doing this is people started talking about things that might not even have mentioned in the clinic setting, even during the first section, even while exploring the text. Even while reading a poem about something, someone might discuss something that happened with a patient that they had or with a family member. So that was an interesting finding. Any questions about how we did this in a half an hour? It seems tight, right? But as long as you keep an eye on the clock and move people along, it's very doable. Yes?
The participants, was that voluntarily? Or was like everybody in the working spot?
Good question. So what we got is buy-in from the administrators to have this a required activity. So what they did was they were in the conference room in the patient-centered medical home meeting. They were all gathered for half an hour or an hour, depending on how long the meeting was, talking about patients. He said, oh, Mr. Johnson, who's up next? Oh, Mr. Johnson, okay. Mr. Johnson's a 57-year-old man with COPD and diabetes. He was hospitalized again last week with uncontrolled diabetes. So whose patient is it? Okay, can you tell us more about him? And the social worker comes in and says, yeah, this patient's been at home and ran out of medicines. He has a really poor home life. So that's the kind of conversation that was happening during the patient-centered medical home meeting. Immediately on the heels of that, then it was my turn. And I said, okay, we're going to have a narrative medicine session now. And it seems very strange initially, but it became part of the routine. This is how rituals can form. It's just how we do things. That's what we did after every session.
Could you tell us a little more about the kind of text you used?
Yeah, I'm going to share it with you on a slide.
Okay, thank you.
I can move it there now. Hey, it's the very next slide. Here are just some examples. One thing we wanted to do is try a bunch of different types of texts. We used a page from a graphic novel called Mom's Cancer. It's an excellent book. We used music. Has anyone heard the song Vivir Mi Vida? No. It's such a good song. You should check it out. By Mark Anthony. Mark Anthony is Puerto Rican but grew up in New York and sings English music. But this song he sang in he sang it in Spanish. So he went back to a traditional musical form, and it's a salsa song. We read poetry. There's a poem called Kindness that we read. Spoken word. We had a video of this young man, Joshua Bennett, performing a work called Tamara's Opus, which is very moving. I encourage you to check that out at some point. So those are some of the examples. We wanted to use different texts, partly to see what resonated with people in this group. And I'll show you some of the results of that. So evaluation. What we did was had a two-pronged evaluation, qualitative outcomes and quantitative outcomes. Okay? So for the quantitative, we had several, these are validated instruments, self-reporting instruments, at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. One was the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which a lot of people use. We wanted to look at engagement because we felt that our goal is not the absence of burnout. Our goal is to have people in the clinic engaged in their work. So we looked at this Utrecht work engagement scale, and then team effectiveness. It's a widely used measure, especially in one of the healthcare systems in the US called the VA system. They use this metric a lot to just think about team functioning. What I liked about this metric is it's not about attitudes. It doesn't say, what do you believe about how teams should communicate? That's not what it's asking. It asks, based on your observation of your clinic, how are people communicating? What's the hierarchy like? What's the level of respect? So things that we know teams should have as capacities, it asks them to report that about their own clinics. And then empathy, interpersonal reactivity index. And then we had qualitative analysis too. We had observation notes at every single session. There was a research assistant who was trained in qualitative research taking observation notes. We also did semi-structured interviews with interprofessional members of the clinic over time, at the beginning, at the midpoint, and at the end. And basically what we found out is of the quantitative metrics, the only one that moved statistically significantly was the team development measure. and it had a moderate effect. Pre and post had a moderate improvement in the team characteristics. We were very pleased with that. It is a pre-post model with no comparison group. So that's, if you're thinking about, statistical inference, if you're thinking about causal inference, the problem is, there could be confounders that affect that relationship pre and post. We know that, but at the same time, we did see an improvement. So I think it's still valuable information. The burnout inventory did not change overall. However, if you stratified the group based on their attendance, the people who attended more, they had an improvement in burnout. Then again, you don't know the direction of causation. We don't know if the narrative medicine metrics, because you don't know if narrative medicine caused an improvement in burnout, or you don't know if those people who were less burned out attended more, right? So that's one of the disadvantages of the pre-post model without a comparison group, is those types of causal relationships are sometimes a little bit fuzzy. Work engagement and empathy did not change. And in terms of the qualitative, one of the most important things we were interested in was this even feasible? Can we even do this in a clinic over the course of a year? Will someone allow us to do this? And we got 3 clinic administrators agreeing to do this over the course of the entire year. Quick thought about feasibility, though, is another concept of sustainability. This project was not designed for sustainability. We didn't say, we're going to stay in this clinic and provide ongoing facilitation as long as you need it. We just didn't have the staffing for that. So that's one of the limitations, is that I'll show you some data that shows that the staff wanted this to continue, but we didn't have the staff to be able to support those clinics. And the clinics didn't have, internally, they didn't have people trained in this. So if we did this again, I think we would have put that in as a outcome that we would have wanted, to have trained someone locally to be able to continue the work. Commitment from administrators was very important. This could not have happened with just the staff wanting to do this. It could have happened after hours. It could have happened, in the beginning. But to get that rich relationship improvement, it has to feel like it's something that the administrators really believe in. Some of the barriers were people felt, I have clinical duties, I have to step out of the meeting. We knew that was going to happen. Sometimes staff might arrive late or leave early because of various reasons. We know that was going to happen as well. And these are things that I shared with you yesterday very quickly. I'll share them with you again. The themes in the qualitative analysis is the staff really appreciated this. These guys are working very hard, and to have an opportunity to just sit down and to do something in that clinical space that felt nourishing, that was really appreciated by them. Just sitting now, just breathe. It's a time where we're unwinding. That was so nice to see. It also makes me think about, and we didn't look at this purposefully, but it makes me think about what kind of mood do we want to put our staff in? Because a lot of the works that we use might explore some challenging aspects of patient care, patient suffering. Some of the prompts that we might use might open up difficult emotions. But I think, after doing this for a year, I think we have to be conscious of the emotional kind of nature of our work and maybe balance some of that type of prompts, some of those types of works with other types of prompts and works that might take them into direction of recognizing things to be grateful for, things that they find joy in, moments of triumph with patients or in personal life. So it's something that we recognized over the course of the year that, if you have a lot of heaviness to all the sessions, they might not feel this all the time. A chance to breathe. Maybe it's going to feel too heavy to come to narrative medicine every month. And I mentioned yesterday the interprofessional communication was really big. And we think that is one of the strongest aspects of this work. And one person even said, we are working with each other a little bit better. So that, I think, is really interesting and kind of worthy of us when we take this work to the next level of evaluation. What does the work that we do in our narrative medicine sessions, how does it impact what happens on the clinic floor, on the hospital floor? And we have to get really creative as researchers to try to measure those outcomes. But I think if we are able to measure those outcomes and find some differences, that's really going to take our work to the next level. This is just a word cloud and a narrative response that came up about, use one word to describe the narrative medicine sessions: creative, interesting, relaxing. It's really nice. So we asked them, what types of text did you prefer? And the highest one was music. This is just frequencies, a number of people responding. So that was interesting for us to see. The lowest was graphic novel. I'm not really sure why that is. I'm curious whether that was just an unfamiliar medium or not. But the rest of them were about the same. Spoken word. We did a meditation session too. And painting was about the same as meditation, spoken word. Poetry a little bit less. And then we had a clip of a video as well. Another thing I wanted to mention is I also collaborated with one of the staff members to co-lead the sessions towards the end. I said, towards the end of the year, I said, if any of you wants to co-lead the session with me, I'd be happy to work with you and kind of talk to you about how these are facilitated. We can pick text together. So a couple of people wanted to do that. And then this was interesting too. We said, would you recommend this program to other clinics? The vast majority of people said yes. And this person's always crabby. I don't know who that is. I said, would you participate in optional sessions before or after work or during the lunch hour? I thought that was very interesting because that's their personal time. And a lot of people said yes. 35 participants said yes. There were about 12 that said no. But a lot of people said yes, which I think is very interesting.
Sorry.
Tell me.
Last picture. Do you prefer before or after? Yes.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
day?
So what this question says is, if this program were offered during your free time,
Okay.
during your lunch hour, before the clinic starts, after the clinic starts, would you still come? A lot of people said yes. So the lessons, I think, that it is feasible. Administrative buy-in is really important. Just be flexible to clinic demands. What you don't want to do is you want to be in alliance with the clinical work. And we always know clinical work comes first. If there's something that the nurse, the social worker, the physician needs to do, you welcome them, to leave. You welcome them back when they return. I think the idea of rejuvenation and relaxation is really interesting. I think it has implications for burnout. We didn't show that it improved overall, but I think we need to do a little more thinking about the mechanisms and what's known about interventions that reduce burnout, and to see if we can tailor the work that we do here for that. Right? And in terms of education, this is kind of things that I had mentioned before. I think we have to really recognize that education is a continuum from classroom to clinical space to professional practice, and we have to think of it as a real ecosystem, something that really is interactive, and not think of them as like little, hermetically sealed silos. And we have to, the hard work, I think, is actually in the clinical setting. It's very easy as a course director to say, students do this, but I think the challenge is much harder, it's higher when we want to start transforming our clinical settings. Right, so I think that is the main things I wanted to show you. Let me see what time we have. Let me just stop right there, see what questions you have, and I'll tell you what else is remaining and how we can prioritize that. Yes, question?
I don't know how you're going to speak for it.
Yeah.
How do you train a trainer? And how trained the trainer must be?
Yeah, this is an important question that we've thought about a lot. We have various levels of training. One level is the master's program. It's in-house. You have to live in New York City for a year or two for that. We know that's not scalable. Another level of training we also have workshops just similar to this, okay? We actually think that it's hard to go out and just start your program after doing something like this. People do it, and we want to encourage people to express, their desires and see what they can create locally. But you might not have enough theoretical background and kind of knowledge of how this process works to be able to do that as successfully as you could. So we actually thought of what's a middle ground to help people get training that doesn't require them to live in New York City. So we developed something called a Certificate of Professional Achievement. It is an online program that people from all over the world participate in. It's 1.5 years old, so it's very new, but it's been very successful. We've been very happy with how it's worked out. At first, I had a lot of concerns about whether we can do these kinds of activities that you've engaged in online, but it's actually been really good. People they have to read every week, they have to respond to prompts, they share those prompts. We have one weekend in New York City during that time. It's 5 courses, 3-credit courses over the course of typically a year, 1.5 years, 2 years. And it's the same faculty who teach in our master's program. So that's another option to do. We have a textbook, Principles and Practice of Narrative Medicine. And all of these things that I'm mentioning are particular to narrative medicine. There are other people who do medical humanities that have different approaches, but our approach, these are the kinds of ways that you can learn about facilitation. Narrativemedicine.org is a site that you could go to kind of see what those opportunities are. Other questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do is quickly talk about the evaluation. Well, I'll mention what we're doing at the medical school. Okay, so at the medical school, we have a required narrative medicine class for all the medical students. It is a selective, which means they have to choose from amongst a dozen different courses, but they have to choose one. They range from dance class, right, to writing, to creating, comic books, right? So this actually is Ben Schwartz, who was a graduate of our medical school, who is a comic, and who now works at the New Yorker, as one of their illustrators, and he left medical practice to do this, and which is a great leap, and we're very proud of him. But we think the biggest achievement that he had was that he was able to leave practicing medicine while his father was the chief of cardiology at Columbia. So that was the biggest challenge for him, is to be able to find his own path, even though he had this very strong family tradition. So this is a scene from the Frick collection. We take our students there as well. And
The what collection? Frick?
Frick. The Frick collection of is that a bad word here?
The freak, I thought you said.
No, it's not the Freak collection. It's the Frick collection. It's a beautiful museum. If you get a chance to go, it's a very small museum, but the collection is exquisite.
Okay.
Let me just show you a little bit about the outcomes that we had in the museums. So we studied 4 years of students who went in one of our courses at the Metropolitan Museum to look at visual art. And we said, what could they be learning there? We did a mixed methods evaluation as well, qualitative research and quantitative. And this paper just came out last week in Academic Medicine. We published on this. And we focused on uncertainty. That's something that has even come up in this class. Again, there's so many things that could be potential outcomes for the work that we're doing. But we felt, one of the core, values of literature and art is uncertainty. Ambiguity is what we live in. So we thought, could this be a way of training students in uncertainty and ambiguity? And we also thought reflection is one step towards being able to tolerate uncertainty. Why is uncertainty important? Because it's linked, if you cannot tolerate uncertainty, there's research that shows that it's linked to burnout, it's linked to overutilization of services, increased cost, anxiety, right? So we educators have said we need to figure out ways to help students tolerate uncertainty better. And people have looked to visual art and humanities for that. So we said, well, why don't we explicitly measure that then, if people are doing it. And the research out there on visual art and education is pretty minimal. A lot of them are just descriptive without very rigorous outcomes. And so we had a 4-year mixed methods evaluation in this, so it's a pretty rigorous approach. And so these were the course objectives: increasing observation, uncertainty. We also were thinking about biases and reflection. This was a joint project between Columbia and Cornell University. And this was 6 weeks, 2 hours a week. It was led by an artist. She had very specific methods, a little bit different than what we did. Let me give a couple examples. So this is a Brancusi sculpture. So one of the methods she used is, she had the sculpture here. She had students stand in a circle around the sculpture with a sketchbook in hand. And from their position, they had to sketch the sculpture. She gave them 5 minutes to do so. Then they put the sketchbook down, and they moved to a different point in space, pick up that person's sketchbook, and continue that person's sketch, and then move again. The purpose of that is to recognize, first of all, observation, and also to recognize that our relationship, physical relationship with the people and objects in our world matters, and it changes what we perceive. So that was the concept we were trying to explore there. This is another example. This is Ariadne by Deepthiman. And for this, she gave this painting. She asked them to just think about, how they're relating to the painting. And she said, think about any memory you have, any association, or any emotion that has come up as a consequence of looking at that painting. Memory, association, or emotion. And she said, now that you've identified one of those things, sketch that concept, sketch the emotion, sketch the memory, sketch the association. I think is a very interesting topic. And so what this purpose of this is to gain an awareness of the affective relationship that we have with art, or with ultimately with patients. So of these 3 instruments that we used, one was for reflection, one was for ambiguity, and one was for personal bias. Basically, we found, let's go through this real quick. What we found was we had an improvement in the ability to reflect. We did not see a statistically significant improvement in bias. But what was interesting is tolerance of ambiguity, which was a proxy for uncertainty. You can see that there was a positive change, and it's a pretty reasonable change given the scale of the metric. Almost achieved statistical significance. It was 0.06. If it had been 0.05, it would have met the threshold for our standard for significance. So I think if we had a larger N, we might have seen a difference there. Right? And then in terms of the qualitative outcomes, one was observation skills. That doesn't surprise us. Another one was awareness of the subjectivity of perception. Another one was the appreciation of multiple points of view. Those were all linked to our course objectives. However, what we did not specifically look for in the qualitative research that came out in a very strong signal was this idea of recognition of art as an opportunity for restoration and connection. I'll read you a couple quotations and then we'll end. One student said, "It was healing in many ways just to get out of that narrative of being a medical student, this kind of monolithic identity of student. It reminded me that I need to take large chunks of time on a regular basis for self-care. It's okay to do that. It's healthy to do that. It will make me a better doctor to do that." And one more student said, "The course felt like a sanctuary away from campus." Right? It's a real beautiful concept. So I think the implications of this is that there is promise for improving ability to reflect, and I think with the ability to tolerate uncertainty. Even though the ambiguity scale did not meet significance, it was close, but it was also mirrored in the qualitative outcomes. And I think the idea of observation as a skill to be honed is just, I'm just glad they got that concept, because that is a concept that you're not naturally born with observation skills, that we have to train ourselves to do that, and that it can be explicitly taught. And lastly, I think this idea of self-care, relationships with one another is really important. And I think ultimately, if we design these programs well, I do think they will affect burnout. We haven't showed it yet, but I think we're on our way. So let me just stop there. We're at the top of our hour, but happy to take questions if you have them. I hope this was useful. It's a very practical kind of march through what we've done and what we're showing so far. The last thing, yeah, please.
I was thinking about, do you think the narrative medicine and this concept is fulfilling for all doctors, including, for example, anesthesiologists or surgeons or orthopedists, the operating specialty?
Yeah, I think, you're always going to get some, not talking about those specialties specifically, but just thinking about people. You're always going to get some people who don't get a lot out of this kind of work. For whatever reason, they're not ready for it, they don't think that way, they're just not interested. So you can't force everyone to get something out of this. But I think the majority of people, if they're in a setting that is, if the exercises are designed well, and they're given space and time and don't feel like they're being pulled from other duties, I think they're going to get something out of this. And we've done it with all different fields, and especially the residents are increasingly open to this type of activity. Just a week and a half ago, I was with the pediatric cardiology fellows, who are very busy technically. Their field is very technical, but they really appreciate sitting down and doing this work with us. Right? Yes, question.
How important is how much do you work with the humanities specialty? Because it sounds as if a lot of the people, the facilitators, are healthcare workers with another interest, or have I misunderstood?
Yeah, so of our narrative medicine leadership, it's very interdisciplinary. The director of the academic program is a philosopher. The associate director, she's a literary scholar. Rita Sharon is a doctor, but also a PhD in literature. And then our fourth person is a novelist in terms of the leadership. And then me, I'm a doctor. So I think it's mainly people who are non-physicians actually in the leadership. That's an interesting question though. If you're going to lead these sessions in a clinical setting, can non-physicians, can non-healthcare people do it? And we have found in our medical students, if the quality of training and the education is very high, students will go along with it. That was a concern of ours initially, but they've been totally okay with it. But if the quality is not very high, students across the board, nursing, medicine, etc., they have very little patience for educational activities that aren't high quality, because they're so busy. Their time is being pulled, there are exams going on, so if you're going to make them sit down for an hour with you, make sure that the people that are facilitating are well trained. Right. Okay, thank you all so much.